Many of you are probably surprised by the title of the video. And yes, I'm trying to be catchy. But my point is, and if Rush was sitting here right next to me, he would agree, I really believe, with what I'm trying to get at with the title and what I'm about to say, is that obviously Rush was so entertaining and so funny. But what's incredible about Rush is how much America needed a Rush. And by that, I mean a cheerleader for America, to stick up for America, not around the world, but within America. I mean, if you look at the globe, how many other countries, I don't care if you talk about Mongolia, Egypt, South Korea, Canada, need a person to be a cheerleader for their country because so many people have been bullied by a group within the country that makes them feel guilty about living in that country, about like there's something wrong with them if they support their own country. And to that part of Rush, the American cheerleader, it's disturbing. And Rush would agree that we needed that in the first place. So that's the idea of the title. But let's talk more about Rush, obviously. You know, Rush, it was an amazing phenomenon, an amazing person. I'm not trying to sound like a sycophant or a Kool-Aid drinker because he was a pioneer. And in this society, the word pioneer gets thrown around so much now. But really think about the word pioneer. All the way back, I don't care if you talk about someone back during the Homestead Act who was in Philadelphia in the middle of a city, saw the federal government was giving free land away in the West, got in a horse and a buggy or whatever and went out there. And with very little farming experience, it's actually really crazy if you think about it. And there's no calling dad to ask for advice. There's no buying a book on Amazon. There's no watching a video on YouTube. You have your instincts and your brains, and that's about it. So with Rush, as far as radio, of course, the medium of radio had been around for a long time. But the idea you're going to go on AM radio, which was dying at the time, and talk about politics, not just politics, but conservative politics for 3 hours. I don't care if it's someone in the radio business or someone at the local coffee shop, they would think you were nuts. And not only did it take off, I mean, obviously, he created an entire industry. There was no right-wing industry. Maybe there was National Review and some of the right-wing conservative magazines or newspapers, books, some books here and there, but nothing even close to what there is now, thank God. So Rush was the great granddaddy of all of them. Savage, Glenn Beck, Bill O'Reilly, you name it. And of course, those are the big household names. There's also regional and local right-wing radio people all over the country now. And he created all of it, the first one. And it was so important at the time. Because let's really think about in the context of the 1980s what was taking place. You had 3 news anchors on the 6:30 news at night, which we all know now were card-carrying Democrats. Dan Rather, Tom Brokaw, Peter Jennings. I'm not trying to demonize them, but when they retired, became even more clear they were Democrats. There was some news on PBS. That was Democrats. NPR was around. That was all Democrats. And it wasn't just Democrats. That was when the transition was taking place from your old school labor Democrats, kind of like my grandfathers, to the 1960s Democrats. And that's what's so important. The people who were the hippies back in the 60s were now coming into their early 40s because it's the mid-80s. So they're in their early 40s now. They're in positions of power at the colleges, the universities, the media establishments, the news media, entertainment world. They're coming into very influential positions. And they have America in their crosshairs. They know all this. They're not stupid by any means. They know that there's really no resistance now. Now it's the cultural issues. They are finally going to fix the culture that drove them insane since the 1950s with their parents and the patriarchy and the Christian America just drove them nuts. Now, mind you, none of them had stormed the beach of Normandy. None of them had been to Iwo Jima. None of them had to learn how to grow vegetables in the middle of the Depression, but they knew everything. And their parents knew nothing. And part of the everything that they learn, really it started with as a trickle effect at the Ivy League schools with professors who were communist sympathizers and who were also influenced by wacky French philosophers. And so now you have a bunch of kids. I'm 42. When I see an 18-year-old, I see a kid now that I'm getting older. So you have these kids who, many of them grew up in suburbs. I mean, they don't get me wrong. There was Bill Clinton stories where they were broke and dysfunctional family and blah, blah, blah. A lot of them didn't have it that bad. Got into college, got indoctrinated. See, the liberals think it's impossible for them to be indoctrinated. It's the indoctrinated right. It's the Nazis that we're supposed to be concerned about, the fascists. Even though, Nazis take away people's rights, not protect them like the right does. But that's a whole different story. So they're all full of this. They enthusiasm after being around these Ivy League professors, and they are going to go out and fix America once and for all. This repulsive 1950s Leave It to Beaver crap has to be fixed. I mean, one of the reasons for the prosperity in the 50s is because we won World War II. Europe and Japan were in shambles. So America has its own baby boom taking place. We're rebuilding Europe through the Marshall Plan. Last thing I know, rebuilding an entire continent that hadn't been destroyed by war isn't, the most self-centered thing to do. Of course, they would construe it as, well, because America hated the communists in Russia. That's the only reason we built. We really didn't care about the Europeans. We just hated the communists, but whatever. So the point is, that repulsed them. And then came the 60s. And now it is the 80s. And you have Democratic left-wing control of the entire news media establishment for the most part. And so this is big for them. The Hillary and Bill Clintons, the Barbara Boxers, the Jane Fondas, the Joy Behars, they are finally going to clean this mess up. And all of a sudden, this Rush Limbaugh guy appears. And of course, I'm sure like anybody, they made fun of him. They demonized him. And the joke is kind of on them in the end. I mean, my God, he created an industry that acted like asbestos against their insanity for the most part. But I do have to point out, as a Rush listener, I was listening to him fairly recently. I think it was back in January. And Rush, one of his favorite shticks that I always enjoyed was the mayor of Realville, as he called himself. You can still see it online if you Google it. It says, "Welcome to fabulous Realville, Rush Hudson Limbaugh, a mayor." Rush was a staunch realist. He wasn't a big conspiracy guy. I mean, I think there's a lot of people, the Alex Jones types, the QAnon types, they liked his political beliefs, but it probably irritated him. Rush was not a conspiracy guy. Rush was a realist. And I remember listening to Rush a couple months ago, and he was talking about how some of the stuff he made fun of on his show in the 80s has become mainstream. And that really concerned him. Because again, he didn't have some delusional thing where he had saved America and, because we're kind of a center-right country now. There was none of that. And Rush was a praying man. I mean, he has obviously his own failings as far as his marriages. And at one point he had trouble with pills. But, he was a praying Christian man. And I might only score a C- with my own Christianity. One thing I know is people who pray, legitimately pray. There's a humility in that. It's one thing to just go to church, and obviously we're supposed to do both, even though a lot of us fall short. But praying, there's nobody around. And I think there's even scripture about that Jesus talked about. It's just, so to do it when there's nobody watching, there's a genuine concern. And he made no qualms, even though he didn't get the details. And when he was praying, I really don't think he was praying about bigger audiences and bigger TV deals. He had legitimate concern about this country and its people. And that concern and that vigor and that enthusiasm led to the enthusiasm of trying to get people excited about this country. And it was contagious. I mean, there was, how many times I'd see a UPS truck driver out delivering packages, which is a hard job. Can you imagine doing that all day? Those guys work hard. A lot of physical labor guys that work hard. And you hear Rush on the radio in the truck. And compare that to if you were listening to Bernie Sanders all day or for 3 hours If you're the guy delivering the UPS packages, or you're at the auto repair shop, or in the dairy farm, or driving Uber, just listening to Bernie Sanders 3 hours a day. I'll tell you one thing, if you did that, you'd have a lot more sympathy for your left-wing friends, because it's like a mathematical equation. 2 + 2 = 4. You drink enough of that poison, you will end up a mess. And Rush was the opposite of that. You actually felt good about your country, for God's sakes. You didn't feel like a victim. Some of the principles that made this country great were emphasized. Some of the things, like lethargy, which is what we produce a lot of in this country, were criticized. He put things in perspective in a humorous way. He's a well-read guy. That's a dirty little secret. You think only the left has libraries where they sit and pontificate while everybody else milks cows and fixes cars and goes to the factory. They are the ones who really, really need to take it all in while these creatures do whatever they need to do. We're the ones that really need to sit back and unlock the secrets of the universe and fix these problems. No. Okay, that's a fairy tale. This country, not just Rush, is full of conservatives with huge libraries who are just as curious as everybody else. And he shared that, but a humorous way, because he didn't have 3 PhDs and he had a conservative radio program that there's no way that could possibly be the case. But it was the case. He shared it with all of us. And it was just an incredible, incredible life. Where we go from this point on is up to us. And one thing I'll point out again, when I was listening to Rush talk about how concerned he was about the country, again, being a realist, he pointed out that it's our fault some of these things are taking place. We might not want to hear it. But when you see a story about a man and playing basketball for a women's college basketball team like I saw the other day, like Rush would say, that is our fault. Whether when he grew up in the 50s or even when I grew up in the 90s, that was not even close to acceptable, period. Not even close. And so Rush pointed out, one, he was concerned, and two, we're the ones who are tolerating this stuff. Now, the left, you got to keep an eye on them, because they'll turn it into, we want to grab them and throw them off buildings like they do in the Middle East and kill everybody. And the good people versus the infidels, that's not what we are talking about here. We're talking about destructive behavior that hurts other people, and someone has to have the courage to stop it. We're talking about America's a good country. Someone has to point that out and defend it. That's what we're talking about, because they're always hiding in the corner somewhere, turning it into some vicious thing. That's not what we're talking about. We start with the center, what's healthy for our country and what's healthy for our people. They don't do that. We do. And so I don't know where things are going to go from this point on, but that's the critical thing to take away, is that Rush was a realist. He was a very intelligent, well-read man, but he was a realist, and he was on guard. And despite the incredible career he had, he was concerned about this country. And so it's up to the rest of us to do something, to not say, oh, our right-wing messiah is gone now, so we're all deflated and everybody goes home, and let's, the people he stood up against for decades run the show. That cannot happen.